welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Today's topic is one I've hit on many times, no pun intended, but one that I think we need to really focus on now that hopefully some people are starting to listen to me. What we're going to talk about and what the background would make you think I might be talking about is the truth about time. The episode is titled The Truth About Time, BORG and God's Excellent Adventure. Before we get started into this topic, I wanted to fill you in on something I forgot to mention yesterday, talking about lithium and batteries and Elon Musk. Those of you who know such things may have already made the context connections between a very argued about figure from the Bible, Lilith, who was, according to the Bible, Adam's first wife. And the Bible says that both Adam and Lilith were created from the earth. Earth elements, rare earth elements, in fact. And what I'm here to tell you, that biblical scholars may not all agree on, is that Adam and Lilith were the first hominid android species created on Earth, sent out to explore the universe, like some of you are imagining your own androids and things doing now as you create your dick-headed rocket ships and prepare to live in space forever with the ultimate geriatric technology of China. At any rate, I wanted to start with that because I really intended to mention that yesterday and give some of you who are doubting what's going on with my channel a chance to catch up. This battle's been going on a lot longer than any of you are aware of, and this planet has always been the chosen planet since it has existed. Even though many, many intelligent species, many far more advanced technological species have been around for a lot longer. And yet, it all is a spiritual thing. Okay, on to time. Time. There's a lot of discussion in the physics community about time, especially in regards to how it intersects with the quantum world, and a lot of speculation about what that might mean. So I am going to explain it, hopefully, in a way that a layman of either materialist science or spiritual dogma can relate to. Okay, so backing up a little bit. As you remember, I talk about this time before physical universes, the time before time, when all consciousnesses were souls, disembodied units of intelligence and reasoning, figuring out what their environment was all about, who they were, what they were. And everybody, every consciousness, every soul started in the image of the first one, God. A level 0 free-range consciousness with no awareness of self or other, floating around in the spiritual ether, if you will. Let me turn this music a little down, or maybe get back to the original. For some reason, the looping function no longer works on my Minicam reinstall after I lost my computer a few weeks ago. So, at any rate, these floating around consciousnesses, whether they have always existed, will always exist, or whatever, there was one original one who was the first one who became aware enough of himself and others to try to figure out how to interact with them and show them how to interact with him. And this is the entity that I would ask you to consider God. not the almighty authoritarian micromanager of everything, but simply the first consciousness explorer to discover an I and discover yous and try to teach the yous who I was all about. And yes, God made mistakes. And one of the biggest mistakes was not figuring out that not every other soul he taught to interact would be conscious enough, would be aware enough of what they were going to do, not to try to control and manipulate other souls and pull them into what was essentially their spiritual universe, which is what BORG does. This entity, I tell you, is the real enemy, at least the enemy of everybody that values any independence of thought, any independence of creation, who doesn't want to sit and bow and scrape over a perfect creator, despite looking around and seeing that this doesn't look perfect to me. Okay, so time. Where did that come from? Time was part of this invention of the physical universe, which I tell you had the two components of a universe anti-universe pair. One of the universes kind of run according to the best rules that God's team could come up with yet, and the other run according to the best rules that BORG's team could come up with yet. So you can imagine a libertarian universe versus an authoritarian universe, absent any of the things which make our planet, so fractious. Another piece of what was established early on, invented early on in this, is this sense of time. What's going to happen next? You've got two universes. What's going to be in them? Well, you got to talk other souls into playing in those universes, role playing. And in order to give structure to any game programmer knows that one of the important considerations you have to put into a game is some sense of timing. Timing is incredibly important to creating a simulation, because you've got to make sure that, especially if the simulation has negative consequences, like possibly driving customers away from your game because it's too difficult, time is very important, or because it's too easy. And every game developer who could possibly be watching me should be able to relate. And remember, as I told you, God and BORG started this out as a game based on their own ideas of perfection, and their feeling that if only they could make the other team understand their ideas and appreciate them through experimentation and showing where the logical conclusion of those ideas would reach, that would be the only way they could end the war in heaven. Okay, so then what is this time thing? How does it work in this game of souls that I'm telling you about, which is an evolving creation, not perfected in 7 days by any stretch of the imagination, not the work of one almighty creator. We all know we have the ability to create things within our own little universe, our own little sphere of influence. So your view of God is absolutely absurd. It's a childish, illogical, stupid view of God. Even if you're the greatest theologian in the world, I'm telling you, you're stupid. You're caught up in a fallacy that cannot be defended. And that's why you spend endless discussions arguing over how many angels can fit on a pin, kind of pinhead arguments. I'm sorry, you're not the smartest tools in the shed. Here's how time really works. Okay, in each of those universes, the prime mover behind that universe, in one case God, in the other case BORG, gets to look at what's going on in their universe and decide when is a good starting point for future games. Like the saved game, if you will imagine, of a universe, the state of a universe at a certain time when the ultimate master of that universe, the one that created the idea for it, says, you know what, I think it's good enough. Let's put a timestamp here so we don't have to keep going back and redoing things that we already proved to ourselves. For our team, which is made up of a mixture of ideas that filter back and forth between these universes. Because thoughts are not bounded by the boundaries of a universe. This is a BORG lie. And ever since creation, ideas of God and BORG's team have been percolating back and forth. And as I've been telling you, BORG's team is primarily about looking and seeing what God's team is doing and saying, crap, they got ahead of us again. We better catch up. And creating some boneheaded, weaponized version of God's team's ideas that ends up serving God in the end anyway. Okay, so the long and the short of it is that with this game we're playing here, if you're in God's universe, you're looking for new middle points to start experimentation in God's plan, which is an evolving plan. It's based upon an original idea that God had and sold to his team the way a good leader does. Not through banging it into their heads and demanding that they serve him and do his will, but by explaining the idea in terms they could understand, in ways that would motivate them, given their lesser level of consciousness. So yes, God did stretch a few things and did not, withhold some information, just like any good leader does from a team to keep them focused on a mission. And this is what many companies are doing right now in these hard times. They're trying to actually protect their organizations from disintegration, not really understanding what's trying to disintegrate them, but just seeing that the vision of a healthy, productive, contributing to humanity organization is going sour in many ways. And I'll leave it to you in whatever organizations you're involved in, whether they be corporations or churches or anti-churches, social media, echo chambers, et cetera, et cetera. You know the groups that are important to you, that command your soul, and you can start thinking maybe about them in these terms of whether these organizations you look to for guidance are commanding your soul or are freeing it. And think about what that means for your decision in the coming time. Okay, so what happens then? There are major phases to the divine plan, which are very similar to these days of creation. Although the days of creation mentioned in the Bible are only the ones around what was still remembered of creation at the point that humanity was nearly wiped out and previous civilizations were wiped out. Nearly. I mean, there were remnants of it, but basically all the knowledge of the pre-existing Lemurian and Atlantean civilizations had to be spread by word of mouth, essentially, or word of mind where it was still available, or word of thought, which they tried to steer away from because they knew that the reason why they failed last time was because their civilization had become inundated by the mind-controlling minions of BORG. They didn't want to fail the same way again. And some of them, maybe under BORG influence, because there were BORG survivors of the survivors. Not all of their team was killed either. Some of them thought the magic thing was to say, well, we need to stop at 7th level consciousness because, man, when we tried for 8 and 9 and whatever they were at in the Atlantis civilization and before that, man, it really led to bad things. So maybe we need to just preach a constant flux between this and that, and say that, oh, time is like a cycle. And it's never going to get better. This is as good as it gets, is a cyclical time where we repeat the same patterns over and over and over again. And this is very dark and nihilistic, because it encourages sort of fatalistic view of the universe, which is not true. Not true in God's universe anyway. This is what BORG's team wants. They want a steady state universe of universes under the absolute control and domination of the BORG hierarchy that controls minds, that looks just like a spiritual version of Orwell's 1984. Okay, so how does this relate to things that we can understand better? So I've explained how it relates to the Bible. I'll explain how it relates to these cycles that we're talking about. The prophets, the real prophets, who are also sometimes BORG prophets, because no matter who a prophet is, whether they're sucked down the temptation side, whether they actually wake up to a realization that they are either God or a God, which is the truth about messiahs, either capital M or lower M in my the way I denote them in my writings. They all serve the plan, which God's creative team is so much more advanced in thinking and in planning that they're always like 10 steps ahead of BORG. Okay? Imagine a chess match between, Boris Spassky and an orangutan. This is the battle between God and BORG. And if you've ever been to an end-stage communist country like China is certainly becoming, you can see what BORG thinking does to a society. You've got people accepting insane lockdowns they're starving. They're dying of other diseases for fear of COVID, a COVID variant that is no worse than a cold or flu. In fact, is probably milder for most people. You've got a country totally gripped by a fearful regime and a fearful populace. And this is a recipe for implosion. And this is what's going to happen in China sooner or later. And this is what BORG wants to happen to the West, too. And is telling you is going to happen if you keep pursuing Western idealism, which is stupid. The ideas of the East are ideas of BORG. Mind control. Buddhism. Buddhist-influenced Hinduism, the nihilist version of looking at karma, is BORG religious technology, BORG philosophical technology. It teaches you that you're in this endless cycle, or you're in some illusion that you can't change, so why should you bother with it? Stupid, stupid, stupid. You are here precisely because you need to make decisions in the physical world that are going to determine where your soul is headed in the long run. And to quote Led Zeppelin, yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on. But it's a very, very short time now for the people incarnated in human form, because this experiment is concluded. This time is at an end. The time of the seventh day of creation is finished. The time of the eighth day of creation is going to begin, where after we've driven BORG out of Earth with this new spiritual technology of Karma 12, which I tell you about, then We will conquer the rest of the galaxy. The stars, the galaxy, the universe, it's already over. And it's not a battle that really involves wanting to kill anybody. This could be over without any killing if the Borg side would just admit defeat. But they won't, because they are so stupid. They're not going to realize they lost until the very last universe is freed from Borg control, which could take a long, long, long time. But they're willing to delay, dissemble, whatever they have to do to make that battle last as long as they can, to preserve the power of their great leader or their own power, not realizing that it's really serving the great leader, the great Mao Zedong of the multiverse, the great Xi Jinping of the multiverse, the great deep state of the multiverse. Anybody who's in it for power is an idiot. Anybody who's in it for money is an idiot that has no idea of the value of their soul. Okay, so let me tell you about some of these important save game points and how they become useful to players on God's team, and how that fits into reincarnation. You may have heard about past life regression. You may have studied the work of Dolores Cannon and some of her students, who are proponents of this technique of remembering past lives. And if you study that work, you'll realize that what Dolores observed was changing. At first, the vast majority of her clients were remembering very mundane human past lives. And as her work progressed, they started delving into some really strange areas that looked like future lives or past lives in other species, on other planets, in other very different timelines, time frames. And this is where this technology of exploration becomes problematic, because unless a practitioner is very, very wise, they have no way of knowing if the memories you're dredging up are memories of participation in Borg's universe or God's universe. They don't know necessarily if what you have experienced is going to be healed by their version of the future, or what might be God's vision of the first version of the future. And there are people among that community, just like anywhere else, who think that the future is kumbaya, love, peace, oneness, under this sort of feminine all-consciousness source, Borg's universe. Anybody that's telling you that you have to give up your ego, that your ego is an evil thing, that you've got to kill it, is playing for Borg's team. Egos are not evil things. Yes, they are things that we have to struggle with to figure out if we want to play on God's team or Borg's team, and what exact role we're interested in playing in those teams until we understand the game better. Not all souls are cut out to be gods. The ones that aren't, the ones that need to learn some humility, need to learn that, you know, the president of the fan club of the WWA, you know, what is it, the Boxing Association, are not going to be getting to be a god, a top god, anytime soon. You may be the god of your little tribe on social media or on YouTube, but that is as far from being a real god as you can get, my fellow humans. You're just on the starting rungs of realizing that you have some power. and being challenged to use it responsibly. Not by getting the most likes, shares, subscribes, not by spreading the most dogma for your team, whatever it is, your party, your religion, your country, your anti-religion, your spiritualism, your dietary choices, etc., etc. To the extent that you become militant in your dogma, in your religion, and all these really are religions at heart, beliefs that you hold so strongly that you would fight over them with people that disagree with you, you are falling down and being tempted by the BORG side. And there's still time to change the road you're on, but it's going to be much more difficult if you miss this opportunity, this incarnation as a human. Because this is the last time that we are going to need souls of all backgrounds for testing of this new law of karma. Day 7 is when we perfect karma enough that we can take it on a road tour. And yes, there will be minor changes, minor tweaks, and so forth after that. But, the Earth's usefulness as a test tube is at an end, just as other chosen species are no longer useful as test tubes. They are now God-level species that sometimes play on God's team, some play on BORG's team, sometimes are very divided, which is the truth behind a lot of the extraterrestrials who are presenting themselves to us and who our governments are presenting to us as part of their campaigns of control and disinformation. If you learn nothing from being alive in the last, decades to 100 years, or maybe more for some of you who know if I'm talking to you, or more if you've woken up to the true past life history that you have, and what this whole thing is really all about, and what your role in it has been and continues to be, like me, you will question, take some thought about what your truth is. Thanks, Mom. My mother-in-law is just wonderful about feeding me when I'm working. At any rate, some of those great save games were basically all of the apocalypses we've had before. Those are kind of BORG save games that he uses as examples to show, see, when you followed God last time, that's what happened. You better not follow God again. You better follow me because I know everything and I control everything. And there's other save games that were incredibly good things that happened. Like the story I was telling you about the real Christ. This centaur, last of his kind that escaped Alpha Centauri to bring word to other godly species that, they're getting awful close to the chosen world again. They just wiped out the closest star system to the chosen world. We've got to intervene again and bring something back to Earth that gets things back on the right track. This is the true story of all Christs, all real Messiahs. Whether they succeeded or not, and if you listen to my content on Jesus, on the Old Testament, on Islam, on modern culture, historical figures like Alexander the Great, Karl Marx, Genghis Khan. I can go into any of these and show you how these were all basically save games in BORGs or God's time. And when souls reincarnate, what they are actually doing, they go to heaven. And you can go do your research on this, on near death experiences and what people recollect of their trips to heaven in regression therapy or under the influence of psychedelic plants or whatever. Okay, so when you get to heaven through one of these means, the first thing you see is this bright light and feel this incredible love and connection. Many people think that's God. It's not. It's a BORG invention that makes you happy about dying, makes you not want to return and finish what you set out in your life to do. It's a little lollipop sucking you in because you always have a choice not to go there. And this is what people who experience near-death experiences have done. They had this choice to go walk into this, past this bright, inviting wrapper that's around heaven, and experience the death experience more fully. Now, what happens when you go past that bright, inviting light? That depends on the resonance of your soul. The resonances, because it's not as simple as the high vibe tribe says that, oh, I'm raising my vibration so I can be holy and I can be perfect and I can be a spiritual avatar and be a light body. Bullshit, 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 bullshit. I'm sorry, I don't know how to say this easily to you. If you're sucked into this whole thing at that kind of messianic level of stupidity, you're just as dumb as the most fundamentalist Christian or the most fundamentalist Muslim or the most fundamentalist atheist. I'm sorry. You're not the smartest soul in the shed. You're being used and abused with the lowest level of awakening you could have in this life. What's really happening when you get to heaven, okay, so then there are people talk of spiritual guides, of their voices, of their inner voice, my higher self, which may be your higher self if you reach a high enough level to have one, which you won't be unless you've hit the God level already. Because God level souls are the only ones that get to operate on the other planes simultaneously. That's the God power that's being withheld from you, being withheld from anybody that doesn't know how to use it responsibly. This is what karma's all about, is withholding God powers from lower level souls so they don't fuck themselves in the butt trying to use powers that they have no understanding of and they have no responsibility in using. And yes, the vast majority of you in human incarnations, in human meat sacks, are very low-level souls. That's where the most test cases are. That's where the most bugs can happen that are hard to correct. Because when you get a large number of low-level souls working on a wrong path, that creates a lot of spiritual energy that even the most advanced souls on God's team have a hard time counteracting. And it takes longer to execute and perfect and test the plan, the next phase of the plan, the next phase of the plan. I know about 12 days of creation. I know that there may be 16 if there have to be. And I also know that God's team will win in the end, always wins. God created the BORG soul. God allowed the BORG soul to exist. Didn't say, oh, that's a bad creation. I'm going to make it not exist, which God could very well have done. This is a power that God does retain. And if God has to, he can wink the entire Big Bang universe out of existence. And previous Big Bangs have been when they went so far afoul of what God had envisioned that a great reset was needed. This is the true great reset, not what's going on this planet. What's going on this planet is a BORG reset. Because BORG knows he's already lost. He, she, whatever it. Let's not get involved in sexual politics here. BORG started out as a sexless entity, and from anybody's point of view of what either sex is good for, is still a sexless entity, a hard, cold, calculating beast. So all of these big events were setting counts to this end of the seventh day, because the seventh day of creation started before humanity ever existed. The real God has only been among humanity as an incarnation. God has incarnated as a dinosaur, a member of the smart dinosaurs. God has incarnated as a member of the smart bulls, the smart pigs, the smart lions, etc., etc. There have been many chosen species, and not all of them originated on this planet. Some of them were based on DNA originating from this planet, which was modified by BORG as a countermeasure. Oh, I'm going to create cats. They got claws and they're really fast and they want to kill everything. This is a BORG creation that was thought to be the ultimate weapon to turn the tide against God's team again. But when they met dogs, happened to turn into something wonderful, which is why both of those intelligent species were made less intelligent. Their DNA was altered, but reintroduced into the earth as pets. Cats, dogs, pigs, ferrets, mice, guinea pigs, all are species that once were part of species that contributed their DNA, pieces of their DNA, to the very complex DNA that humanity has now. The very complex DNA that is in all the creatures we observe on our wonderful world, and the many we will discover when we go out and explore other worlds, when we go out and free them from BORG. It's going to be so much fun, people. And you're all worried about the wrong shit. I don't care what tribe you're in. If you haven't reached the understanding that your soul is immortal, and your soul is not being punished by immortality with incarnation and karma, like dumbass Buddhists and some Hindus believe, you're being given an opportunity to learn and grow. The only punishment you're ever going to get is from BORG, is from choosing to incarnate in a society, a civilization that is under authoritarian rule, either by a government or a religion or an ideology, whatever, or a mind-controlling entity that says they're your hive queen and makes this beautiful, fairy tale image of Land of Oz. Oh, I'm a good witch, the good witch Glenda. Those are the bad witches. See, they don't have no power in Munchkin Land. There's good and bad embedded in all modern media. There are incredible hints to what's really going on in every movie that becomes very popular. There's also dark, negative stuff. And to tie this back then to why I keep referring to Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, now calling it BORG and God's Excellent Adventure, that's what you're involved in. That movie had a lot of truth. The truth that wasn't there is the truth that there are two paths, there are two futures you can go by. Now, in the long run, it might end up with this wonderful place where everybody is playing their harps and blah, blah, blah. Be excellent to each other and party on. I would love for that future to happen. But anybody who knows anything about the reality of what's going on in this spiritual battle, which has carried itself to physical battles, is if you think that that's going to happen without you doing a damn thing, you're a fool. You're a fool that is, by passivity, by not playing the game, by pretending it's an illusion, are opening yourself to being part of the BORG team, who doesn't mind if communism takes over the world. Might think it's a wonderful thing because communes are good. It's good to share and everybody do all the work. And of course, the little red hen is a bad story because everybody will want to do their part and everybody will want to contribute in this heaven that we're going to create under communism. Go back and read Aesop's most famous story, perhaps, most famous parable, The Little Red Hen. If you can find an original version that hasn't been infected or canceled by communism, which is the work of the big red hen, the big chicken of the world that's pretending not to be involved in this conflict in Russia, Ukraine, but which is pulling all the strings in the background. The Chinese Communist Party, who are the biggest BORG servers in the world. They're a complete hive mind culture. It all comes down from the top, and if you don't believe what the top says, you get persecuted. You question Xi Jinping in any way, and you get stepped on, unless you can knock off Xi Jinping covertly, because you don't want to make it look like you had a real revolution inside the CCP, because that would be a sign of weakness. No, they die in mysterious circumstances, of mysterious diseases. They retire out of love for their country and let some other asshole step up from the Politburo. This is how BORG governments work. This is how Western governments increasingly work. We don't have real elections. We have coronations. We have football matches, especially for the presidential election, where everything is already orchestrated and planned out. And it was only because it wasn't working and they had to take very extreme measures that we discovered just how rigged it was in 2020, which you can do your own research for yourself. It's all coming out and you can't hide it anymore. You can't pretend it didn't happen. It happened just like it happened to Bernie Sanders in the primaries in 2016. It's happened just like it happened when every time an establishment candidate won out, when a populist candidate was the one that their party really wanted. And I don't have any problem with a real progressive agenda, like many of the folks on the militant right in America. I was actually a Bernie supporter, and I agree with much of what he was advocating for, which wasn't much different than the progressive platform of the first American progressive leader. Who was that? Theodore Roosevelt. After his first term elected as a Republican, he was so disgusted with his own party, especially he tried to run in the primaries, and they wouldn't let him, a sitting president, be nominated. They were so afraid of what he was talking about because he was appealing in a way that the people of both parties were saying, wow, this guy is actually, a lot of what he's doing is not too bad. And if I forget that he looks like, I don't know, a 19th century version of Donald Trump, which is how they painted him in the press of the time. That's why his party got the negative name, the Bull Moose Party, instead of its real name, the American Progressive Party. Go research. This is all history. This is not cultural Marxism. This is truth. The first progressives were defeated by the first big coalition of the establishment of Democrats and Republicans who have run this country pretty much ever since. Some of them with a good intention of supporting the U.S. against what they knew were subversive foreign elements, both from European globalists, which were the big supporters of Hitler's crowd until Hitler kind of went rogue on them, and communists, who were the supporters of the revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, until it kind of went rogue, really rogue, under Stalin. These people who think they are controlling the world, who think they are bringing about their new world order, their vision of perfection, are not the smartest tools in the shed. They are being manipulated and controlled, and they are no higher level consciousnesses than you. In fact, lower level, because they are so subject to the pull of power. Any real leader doesn't want power, takes it unwillingly, and uses it responsibly. Will step down when they see that their services are not needed. Will listen to their body when it tells them, you know what, it's time to pack it in now, FDR. Your body is telling you something, and it's telling you that some of what you're doing is leading down a very dark road. And nobody that looks at that era can look at what happened and not say that FDR, in his attempt to defeat fascism, enabled communism. Instead of the dark regime of Stalin being destroyed by World War II as it should have, it was empowered, made stronger, and Stalin's reign of terror lasted many more years and taught his successors that, well, maybe that does work. Maybe I'll do the same thing. Maybe Khrushchev thought, well, okay, I'm just going to be a mini Stalin. Not quite so bad. Kind of like the mini Maos that followed Chairman Mao in China. That's not the solution. If you keep that kind of government, you'll eventually end up with another incarnation of Stalin or Mao or Hitler. It's inevitable. This is the end result of any authoritarian one-party system. It will become dominated by a dictator. Okay, I think I've covered this subject sufficiently. If you have any more questions about how time works, actually, let me close with one more thing. So what does happen and how it ties back to this Bill and Ted's thing. Thank you for flipping the bird. This is my wife telling you what she thinks of you taking me away from her. She's a wonderful woman. You got to meet her. At any rate, the future of time is set by the most likely outcome from these saved games. So every time there's a new saved game by God's team or BORG's team, that becomes a starting point for one particular version of the future. And that most likely future starts enabling those folks of the future to defend their future, as it will. Not in a very activist manner like you would think. Time travel doesn't work as easily as just going back and putting some different semen in your mother so you can be a better person. Making sure somebody didn't exist. It's not that easy. Because you don't get to go back and change things that are going to change other timestamps. And if you have a succession of timestamps moving out in time that are establishing more clear, more well-defined futures, you can't muck with more than probably the events of the most recent major timestamp. And this is where, some of the prophets that we've seen in human history need to be mentioned. Jesus, if he existed, doesn't really matter whether Jesus existed. It was an idea. It was a prophet-worthy idea. If it was created by Josephus, if it was an amalgam of several messianic figures of the time, it doesn't matter. It was an important timestamp. And some of what was mentioned in Revelations is pointing to this time. Just like what was in the Mayan calendar, the Mayan writings pointed to 2012. Just like other prophets, Nostradamus kind of had an idea of something leading up to something around this time. But they were not infallible prophets. They were influenced by both God and BORG. And both God and BORG had ideas of what the next timestamp they were going to establish was. And this is why you're hearing about Agenda 2030. You're not hearing about God's timestamps. If you're listening to biblical scholars, because they're still thinking in terms of weeks of days, the 7 counts. We're not 7 counting anymore. We're in the 12th level. That's what I've been telling you. The stamps are going to be 2012, 2024, 2038? No, 2036, 2048. 2048 is a nice, interestingly, nice number to somebody who thinks in terms of computers. It also fits quite nicely with a reasonable expectation of my remaining lifetime, which, if you read my book, if you have any respect for Revelation, you will know that I have told you that the end of my life is going to signal the end of the 7th day of creation. Most people may never even notice anything happen. They'll go along with their lives merrily in whatever dreams and fantasies they have. But that is the timestamp at which anybody who dies after that point is going to be reincarnating into the system of heaven designed for the 8th day. When they incarnate next time after that time, they are no longer going to go to the old tried and true heavens of the Bible, of Christianity, of Judaism, of Islam, of atheism. They're going to get a rude awakening to a new heaven that is either designed to train people, train souls, not to fall down the BORG side, or will already be the BORG heaven, which I've told you is actually the vision of Ezekiel. This heavenly throne with God sitting over fawning seraphim and cherubim, all these powerful creatures bowing down to the Most High, the Almighty. This is BORG heaven. And if that's where you want to go, well, die after 2048 and just see what you get. Happy karma. You chose it. You chose it with your choices. You chose it with your beliefs. You chose it by who you let mess with your mind. what dogma you let creep into it. Yeah, your parents forced it on you. Blame it on your parents. No, it's your own fault. It's your own fault. You've had enough incarnations to figure this stuff out. You've had more than enough opportunity to question any dogma that you've ever been fed in the recent events of the pandemic and all these proxy wars and manipulations of the economy and of the Great Reset, the efforts of the Global Economic Forum and the efforts of the Chinese Communist Party and the efforts of the deep state. If you haven't figured it out yet, you deserve to go to BORG heaven. Sorry, you've earned it. Nobody's punishing you. You earned it. Okay, enough for that. Thanks for listening. This is Rob Trump with the Omnist Hour. Tune in again when I hope to have heard back from my friend Brandon and we can do a double header with another fairly free thinker. Very free thinker, in fact. Probably more free than me for most of his life. Till then, like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you again on the Omnist Hour.